Hey guys, today I want to talk about this war crime trial that took place in Ukraine earlier this week for a Russian soldier who killed an Ukrainian civilian. And of course, this is a very, very tragic event, and we hope that war crimes like this don't happen ever again in the future. But then I think probably like people are concerned. Okay, is this trial really going to, I guess, stop future war crime, or at least how much does it do, right? And my thoughts are that well, probably not too much in terms of I guess substantial impact, right? Like in terms of curbing war atrocities by say Russian forces. But I think it's more of a symbolic impact, a symbolic kind of implication, right, or symbolic meaning. So of course, I am no expert in the domain of law. I don't have a JD, and also international is very special. So I'll just be sharing with you my thoughts, and if you have any other ideas or questions or comments, feel free to share them in this comment section below. Okay, so let's talk about this trial, right? So this trial is like can it stop future Russian like war crimes? Well, I think that probably no, right? Because the core of those atrocities, the Russian atrocity, was that like the Russian forces, they have a long and deep tradition of committing war crimes, right? So, for example, let's say go back to the Second World War era, right? If I were to rank all the World War II countries in terms of war crimes and atrocities, obviously Japan would come first, right? Because Imperial Japan, yeah, like for people, for example, you have heard of their three greatest atrocities in Asia Pacific, and also like they kind of kill people like for fun, right? That was yeah, that was brutal. So I'll put Japan as number one, and in terms of number two, like most people probably put Germany, right, because of the concentration camps and mistreatments, right, of civilians and prisoners of war. But I would personally rank Soviet Union as number two, or at least that will be a tie between Soviet Union and Germany, right? Why is that? Well, for example, let's just take one department, which is the treatment of prisoners of war. The Germany, yeah, they had those concentration camps, for example, but those were mostly towards the Eastern Front, right? So, for example, towards the Russian soldiers. Actually, on the Western fronts, toward the Allied soldiers, the treatment of war prisoners were actually not so bad. I think they still maintain some sense of chivalry, right? And whereas if you look at the Russian treatment of prisoners of war, it was just bad across the board, right? From German prisoners to Japanese prisoners, and I think that the numbers go something like this. There's like in total about 3 million German prisoners of war were taken by the Soviet Union, and I think 1 million died, right? And some estimates go as many as like 1.5 or 2 million, something like that. Okay, so I just want to say that yeah, they have a long history of committing war crimes, and something relatively interesting was that the Soviet Union doesn't just commit war crimes against people from other countries. They also mistreat their own people, right? For example, if you're a Russian soldier and you're taken as the prisoner of war, and if when you go back to Russia, right, you're going to be publicly shamed, like you're going to be abused, right? Um, Another aspect I want to point out is that the Russian forces are really abusive towards their own new recruits, right? And you saw like new recruits getting yelled at. Okay, those were just verbal abuse, but they get physically abused and everything as well, right? So they're kind of brutal towards their own people. So how can you expect them to be very very kind towards people from other countries, right? Then talk a little bit about this trial, right? This trial also kind of they had a bit of abnormalities, right? So first of all, this trial took place right during the war, which is already unusual. Usually, this kind of things you gotta save it until the end of the war. And another thing was that this trial took place in a civil court, not a military court, right? Which I don't know if that takes away from the credibility of the trial. But just so for those of you who are not aware, like for war crimes, it doesn't mean that like why do we need a military court? Because when you participate in a war as like a soldier, as a soldier or general, it doesn't automatically make you a war crime. It doesn't mean like you've committed war crime, right? As long as you operate the killing machines in a humane or justified manner, like you could still participate in war but never be tried for war crime, right? And that requires kind of the court to distinguish between, okay, was that attack really justified? What kind of target were you aiming at, and etc. Was it really, what was the circumstances really necessary to use brute force? So those are a little bit like a professional kind of a technical kind of analysis, right, which would require a military trial. Right, and of course, my last bit of concern was like, usually, like we know that there is an international court in Hague, the Netherlands, right? Like usually the war crime kind of trials, they could take place there. And I'm not sure what's kind of the process. Of course, the ICC, right? They could delegate powers towards countries, right, in other places. But I'm not sure like if this like how this was done, behind the doors, right? So yeah, so those are some of the things, the bit of abnormalities of this particular trial. But experts say that it was perfectly legal. Okay, so let's not question that. Okay, kind of one more kind of observation that well, I guess probably the most important observation was that, some people were defending this Russian soldier, right, especially his lawyer, are saying that, hey, this was just a 21-year-old kid, he didn't know what to do. When his superiors told him to shoot at this Ukrainian man who was holding a cell phone, because the Russian soldiers suspect, they were calling the Ukrainian forces. This young soldier, 21-year-old, had no choice but to obey his superior's orders, right, and shoot at the man, right? Yeah, and of course, we just talk about the abusive nature of, say, Russian forces. So some people kind of feel bad for those young soldiers. Well, I want to say that this defense itself is BS, right? And this was a precedent set back during the Nuremberg, during World War II, right? During the Nuremberg trials, right? This principle is that you cannot use superior's orders as a defense. It is at most a mitigating factor. Right? And the reason we don't want to use it as a defense, it's not a valid defense, because like all the soldiers are going to point fingers to their commanders, and all the commanders are going to point fingers towards like the political leader or the country's president, right, or president, or the supreme commander, right? So then in the end, there's only going to be one person who is responsible for all the war crimes, and I don't think that's very convincing, right? So that defense is BS. And this defense kind of reminded me of, like, some people are going to be asking, okay, then what could have this Russian soldier done, right? Because we know that Russian commanders could be very abusive. So it reminded me of this movie, Suicide Squad, which is kind of old, came out in 2016. And in there's a scene, right? So one guy is called Deadshot, played by Will Smith. He is part of the Suicide Squad. And there was this lady who's the leader, or at least the person behind the Suicide Squad. This lady told Deadshot to shoot Harley Quinn, right? And Deadshot, just for a bit of context, he had I think a grenade implanted into his neck. So if he disobeys, then that lady could theoretically detonate that grenade and kill Deadshot, right? And we know, and Deadshot, what he did was that he aimed at Harley Quinn, and he fired his shot, but he missed, right? So we know that Deadshot never misses a shot, right? So what I'm saying is that maybe you don't you have to obey, but at least you have the freedom to miss your shot, right? And of course, like this soldier was 21 years old. Maybe he hadn't seen that movie, right? So that's that's one option for the soldier. But of course, that's just hindsight, right? And then lastly, I want to point out that the fact that the Ukrainian authority decided to run this trial during the war conveys an important message, in my opinion, that they believe that they're eventually going to win this war, right? Because this kind of war crime trials are only held by the victors of war, right? Because, like, for example, the loser and victors, right? They could both commit the same actions, but the victor, because you're winning, I will never try you, right? And so that kind of maybe gives us a glimpse into kind of the future of the Ukraine war. Of course, I guess there's no doubt that eventually Ukraine is going to win, right? So these are all my thoughts, and if you have any kind of thoughts, ideas, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. And thank you very much.